sit on the board of Chapel Down Wines, and he asked me to come and talk today. I think he wanted me really just to share gossip about my time at the Football Association, which I won't do, I'll share a bit. So I'm trying to do a serious thing, literally about, I say, building better businesses. What I'm trying to think about is how would you, as investors, try and beat the average? I'm guessing that the reason you're here today, you braved, we've all braved COVID, you braved an hour fuel shortage, horrible weather. There are other things you might be doing on a Saturday afternoon. I should be at Molyneux watching my team Wolves play Newcastle, but we're all here because you're a bit more interested, I think, than the average investor about trying to beat the average. And of course, by definition, beating the average is difficult. There's a distribution, so you have to work and look a little bit harder. So to me, it's all about finding businesses which have got a real competitive edge. And it's easy to say and hard to do. Because frankly, most things, it's all very well hearing about a Tesla or a brand new tech investment. Most things in which you'll invest will be in mature industries that people have been buying for years, and they're highly competitive. The difference between a good one and a less good one is quite small, so how might you go and find it? And then what qualifies me to talk about it? Well, a little bit. I think, if I look back at my career, I've been working for 40 odd years, been in highly competitive industries, quite different places, different types of things, and different ownership models. So I've been in the corporate world, so I really good experience both for Mars and also PepsiCo, where I worked at the Walker's business, so that's proper kind of blue chip companies. I've had two in-depth experiences in private equity. So I helped a private equity company take Birdseye from Unilever. That was the first time they sold off a big business. And then United Biscuits. I've seen what private equity can do. And then I've worked in the not-for-profit sector, which is the Sports Administration, the Football Association, which is it's a non-for-profit organisation. It raises a lot of money and spends it back into football. But also probably the most highly competitive sport in the world. So I think I've learned a few things on the way, and now I'm in I do non-exec work, so I stopped full-time work at the end of 2019. I'm a non-exec at Chapel Down Wines, I chair that. England's biggest sporting charity, the Football Foundation, and also, which I'll touch on this as well, a joint venture in ice cream between Nestle and another private equity company, which is number 2 in the world, Unilever. So I do know competitive companies pretty well. So I think probably the big thought is, when you're looking at where to invest your hard-earned money, I think thinking a bit more like a private equity person would, but a public stock investor, is going to be quite helpful. In my experience, boards of private companies, whether private equity or just private, know more about the businesses they run than public companies. A public company board is more about compliance, making sure that they're staying on the straight and narrow. And when you think about it, private equity companies, every pension fund in the world has got a section allocated to private equity because they do deliver above average returns compared to regular stocks. So what do they do? And the biggest thing they do is that, they have an army of people, bright people, crunching the numbers, looking at various financial ratios, all that kind of thing, but they look under the skin of the business, and they're not afraid to ask and probe the qualitative factors. What's the quality of the management? What's the culture of the organisation like? Are they clear about where they're going to go? And I'm going to talk today about unashamedly about the quality of things. You're investors. I'm not going to tell you much about what financial ratios to look at. By the way, they vary a bit by company. But I think there are 3 things I'd say have a look at and try and understand before you make a big investment. And these are the 3 things. Can you understand the strategy? Is it something that you could explain in a minute? Or is it just a set of words or pictures that kind of sound good, but actually you couldn't really repeat it to someone down the pub over a pint of beer? Do you understand the strategy? Has it got a winning culture? Do the people turn up to work really with the interests of that company at heart? Culture for me, I'll talk about it in depth, is how do people behave when the grown-ups in the organisation aren't looking? So have you got a real competitive company culture? Very important. And then performance management. Does the organisation, is it really serious about organising itself to deliver a hard competitive edge? Because frankly, I've worked in a number of companies, quite ones that do typically overperform. So I'm going to tell a few sort of stories about my experience in all three on strategy, culture, and performance management to try and bring this to life, and then summarise perhaps with a few thoughts that might be helpful for you. So any business needs ambition. Any organisation needs ambition. You know, whether it be I want to be the biggest English wine sparkling English wine producer. I want to have a 50% market share. I want to win a World Cup. You need ambition. But a target isn't the same as strategy. And too many companies make that mistake. So for example, I want to get 50% share of the car market is not a strategy. That's an ambition. Strategy is a bit more complex, and you need to understand what kind of things you do and build to give yourself a chance to beat the average. And if you get it wrong, if you get strategy wrong, it's a cruel world, and it can be life-threatening. You know, for example, think about the British beer industry. You know, it had a dominant position in beer. It owned all the pubs. It's in the 1970s, not that long ago. It defined its market as bitter beer. And this inconvenient upstart continental product called lager was coming in, and they ignored it. The consequence of that is there is not a scale British lager brand. Lagers are all continental Europeans, and it changed the brewing industry. They got it badly wrong, and actually went out of business in effect as a consequence. Strategy can cost you. The famous one, Fujifilm versus Kodak. They both made a lot of money in selling, remember the days, physical photographs. You take photos, you put them in a bag, someone developed them. And then inconveniently, some bright spark at Kodak developed a digital camera. It changed the business model totally. Two different responses. Fujifilm embraced it, saying, right, okay, how might we make digital photography valuable and interesting? Of course, it's painful because you've got all this invested equipment in business in translating and developing film. But they embraced it. Kodak just saw the market as actually physical film. We ignore this digital stuff, and their defined market that they worked out were smaller. Today, Fujifilm is worth about the same as it was when digital was invented. Kodak is a shadow of itself. Get it wrong, and it's life-threatening. So in any strategy, and you can, once again, sort of try and look at your favourite investments, see if you can distill what the strategy is, but you need three things. You need a clear diagnosis. What is the problem? And what's the opportunity? It needs to be in plain English, and it makes sense. You need an overriding organisation principle guiding thought. You know, so for example, take my FA experience, it was professionalisation. Every service that the FA offered football needed to be at the level of the best in sport, not just average. So modernisation. When I turned over the FA, there were still fax machines, and it was quite surprising. So you need a guiding thought that will guide everything that you do. Was it going to promote modernisation or not? In which case, you don't do anything. And you need a resource plan, which is all very well under the strategy, but if you can't afford to do it, or can't get the people to do it, it's a pipe dream. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and there's plenty of companies that talk the talk but can't walk the walk because they've not actually got a holistic plan. I'll give you a couple of examples of the best and clearest strategies that I've come across in businesses that I've been involved in. When I first was a young lad, I got a job at Pedigree Pet Foods. You speak later on, Alan later will know about this. It was at Mars at the time. Pet food is Mars' biggest business. If you think about Mars as a confectionery company, bread brands, pet food is their biggest business. I turned up there as a marketing guy, and my first day met the marketing director, and he said to me, he obviously asked every person who'd ever joined, what do you think your job is? And I said, to grow market share. And he said, yeah, kind of, but actually, here's how we see the market. Pedigree are the market leader in prepared pet food, cat and dog food. But actually, we're tiny when you look at all of the food that cats and dogs eat. So we at Pedigree do a calorie study every year. There's X million cats, X million dogs. On average, they eat Y calories. There's a calorie pool of this. When you look at that, there's loads of growth to go for. That's what drives the Pedigree business, not just the market share in the prepared category, but the bigger thing. And for me, that was massively inspiring because it just made you think differently and it made you restless to keep innovating. And the strategy behind it, so what do we need to do? Well, we need to make our calories better value than and better nourishment than the alternative. So if you can give pet owners that, you're going to be on a winner. How do you do that? Least cost, so automate whatever you can. Biggest growth margin, so you can invest in research and development to make ever better products and advertise it consistently. And we all got it, and everybody in the business got it. And you know, for example, as I say, as a young marketing manager, I developed a product called cat milk. You know, just inspired by that. What do cats like to do? Everyone feeds them milk. Bumped into a technical person one day who said, "Do you realise that cats are lactose intolerant? So we're all giving them milk, and they can't process lactose very well. Why don't we make a lactose-free cat milk?" And we got together with a local dairy and did it. It's not a transformational business for Mars, but it's another example of a 30, 40 million business. Really clear strategy. I joined Walkers in 1992, Walkers Crisps. PepsiCo had owned it for about 3 years. It was sort of head-to-head market leader with Golden Wonder, but had sort of lost its way a little bit. And the problem that Walkers was facing was, I remember it very well at the time, one of our big rivals, KP, had produced a report for the retail trade saying the crisp is dead. Long live the snack. And their basic proposition is crisps are dead boring, but the interesting stuff like hula hoops and Wotsits and Quavers, you know, that's where the future is. And there are things like kettle crisps as well. So they're sort of saying all these things around the big boring centre was what was going to drive the market. Walkers had sort of lost its nerve a little bit. It had been losing a bit of share in crisps, hadn't got many of these other interesting snack things. And I remember very vividly, we had an offsite saying, you know, what are we going to do about it? And the decision, very simple, is actually make crisps interesting. Make them more interesting. Give them star quality. Treat them like you treat a highly attractive brand. If you think you're a commodity, you will be. So actually, make them better, make them ever better quality, make them fresher, make them more interesting, and keep your prices high. Don't get sucked into constantly discounting. Keep your prices high so you can afford to invest behind it. And from 1993-94, we took the bags from plastic bags, if you remember those, into foil. Despite the fact consumers didn't want them, but it kept the bags, kept the crisps fresher. Freshness is ever important. We flushed every bag with nitrogen. That would keep them fresher for longer. We, of course, advertised more consistently, and that was the start of the Lineker campaign. We wanted to have an advertising campaign that lasted for years, that was high quality. We launched things called Sensations to get into kettle chips. And what we did was we totally restructured the market. Because crisps are like 60% of the market, you make, 10% growth on 60% is massive. But 10% growth on something like 1 or 2% like a hula is tiny, and you resegmented the market. Walkers went in about 12 years from 28 market share to 60. Golden Wonder went out of business. KP effectively had to get out of making money out of crisps and was highly marginalised. It's the case of strategy. The right strategy can really do something for you. The wrong one can really mess you up. And then just on a more personal basis, just to amplify getting strategy slightly wrong, Chapeldown. I joined Chapeldown about a year ago, and in my interview process, I was saying to the major shareholder, I think the mission of the company just doesn't make sense. So the mission of Chapeldown was, it had grown brilliantly as a wine company, and then it wanted to be seen as Britain's most interesting alcohol company. So we're great at wine, we're going to go into these other segments. It then went into gin, and it built a gin sort of experience, if you like, experiential centre out by King's Cross. And it went big into craft beer. Nice brand called Curious Brew, went big into that. Actually, it wasn't a bad diagnosis on strategy, because Chapeldown was a loved brand, and the people there clearly knew what they were doing. But it failed on that third element, which is, is there a practical program to deliver it? We couldn't afford it. We could not afford to grow a craft beer brand, a gin business, and keep funding the wine business. So cash and resource were the issue that failed it, and we quickly went to address that. Triggered by COVID, the beer business was sold, the gin business sold, and for most of this year we've been a pure play wine business and absolutely thrived. Absolutely thrived. 60% increase in wine sales, growing market share, growing brand regard. Focus is really important. And the thing with strategy, you've often heard it said, it's not original thought, strategy is the art of sacrifice. You can't do everything. If you try and do everything, it will kill you. And just that simple switch within Chapeldown, go back to what made us famous, has been liberating and will be a source of enduring value. Do visit our stand, and you're welcome, of course, to buy our shares. Culture. Now, you hear a lot about culture, you may not. If you Google it, I think it comes up more often than strategy. So people know it's kind of important, but don't really understand quite what it is. So a little bit of history. After World War II, or during World War II, the American government put a lot of very smart people into effectively the industrial setup of the US, particularly the auto industry. Lots of people from Harvard, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they pioneered and developed basically system control measurement, time and motion measurement, whatever you call it. So every US car business was very well organized. Yet they noticed, and a big study was done towards the end of the decade in the 40s, because they're all doing things the same way, but some plants and some businesses were way more productive than others. What was it? And, some of the answer was, well, there might have been an X factor for the plant manager, that he or she was just that bit better at engaging people, so people were coming to work feeling a bit more motivated. But the missing link was obviously culture, how people turned up, whether they had more of their brain switched on when they came to work or not, whether they gave a monkeys about whether the company was doing well. So culture, that's actually spurned a whole industry in companies that will help other companies improve their culture. So it's not about, so culture is really not about happy workers. I mean, happiness helps, but it's not the same thing. It's actually, are you organising your people well enough so that they care when you're not watching them to do the right things? So I kind of was learning this lesson when I was running Walkers, and we basically did a big listening campaign with all of our frontline people, so in the factories. Because what we noticed is Walkers was growing like an absolute meteor, doing really well. When we polled the workers saying, how do you feel about the company, it was all a bit blah, a bit average, I'm not really sure. And we did listening groups, we did explaining why the Walkers' success will benefit them as individuals, benefit their communities, a bit of a lesson to every frontline employee about actually how capitalism works for enough, and why the fact that Walkers making big profits, and some of that going back to the States, wasn't a bad thing, because here's all the investment put back in. That worked really well. And one of the reasons we knew it worked well, and I wasn't looking for it, is that we just noticed that packaging waste really improved. Now let me explain that, it's a very dull topic, I'll be quick. In the Leicester factory, Walkers, our biggest factory, it makes 10 million packets of crisps a day, and they're small bags. And there's about 262 bagging machines, which basically cut the bags as the cylinder of plastic comes through, or foil comes through, and cuts them. If your people are on it and motivated, they will set the jaws as tight as they can to minimise the waste. If they're feeling a bit foggy or not that bothered or a bit pissed off, that tolerance will be greater. We just noticed, without there being a formal measurement of it, packaging waste improving as employee regard and belief in the company grew. You might hear from Alan Leighton later, but I got great inspiration from this. One of tills, till ladies, people that run the checkouts in supermarkets. For years, lots of supermarkets saw that was their biggest problem, wastage, where people might be lifting a bit of money, and companies like Sainsbury's would be spending ever more time on filming and double checking and really crowding management around the person who's basically doing your checkout. Asda did the opposite thing. It actually said, we're not going to do that, we trust you totally. You are our most important person in the store. You're the last experience that we have. We are not going to supervise it. And guess what? Shrinkage, all those kind of things went down because the people there felt trusted. Asda had a positive culture. People felt that they were working for Asda and they were being valued, and they weren't just a unit of production. So it really is important. And so that's in business. I do want to talk a bit about football learning. The FA does many things. I want to talk about the England football team. It was obvious to me, as an avowed non-football expert, that the terrible track record we had in England in international tournaments was not because we didn't have very good players. We actually have very good players. May not be the best in the world, but better than our track record predicted. But when players put their shirt on, they seemed to play worse rather than better. And that was so obvious to me, a cultural issue. The trouble is, in an environment in the world of football, it's very conservative. It doesn't have curiosity, not very humble. You can't tell people anything. So my coming into the FA as a being involved in fall up in on Leicester City's board and but it was a very awkward thing to keep raising, saying, look, it's obvious that what we need to do to get better in tournaments is to be really, really serious about how the players are thinking when they put their shirt on. And that's culture. And to add insult, if you like, to football injury, and I got a lot of this, and every day I was asked, where are your medals? How can you tell us what's important? Very opposite being at Saracens. I managed to persuade the head of the technical department and Gareth Southgate at the time to get the team psychologist from the All Blacks to come to help the England teams, men and women. The All Blacks are the best team in the world. They've got a tiny population, they win everything, and they have a great reputation for leaving countries where they visit in a better place. Fantastic culture. And we hired him, Owen Israel, and it was brilliant. And what he did was, he got under the skin of what a modern young English player, typically male, thinks about playing for the country. And guess what? They might not have both parents who are English, but they may be mixed race. The old-fashioned way of pumping the badge on your chest and that definition of patriotism had changed. And he got under the skin of it brilliantly. What does it mean to play for England? Well, I want to give something back. Now, typically, I've come from a challenged neighbourhood. I'd like to be seen as a role model. I'd like to be someone who tries hard. I'd like to be seen as fearless. So if you counterpose those sort of feelings to the Dark Blues and to Iceland in the Euros, where the great players, froze on the pitch, that was revolutionary. And that thinking was then brilliantly pulled together by Gareth Southgate for the Russia World Cup. And you saw a younger squad playing, everyone saw it. So we don't care, we love to win. We can see them playing differently. We like this. And they weren't freezing on the pitch. They won a first penalty shootout in a competitive game in eons. And weren't always looking to the bench when something was going wrong, they became better decision makers. That's culture. That's a very different thing. It clearly works, it's clearly important. And so, in any organisation that you look at sort of investing into, try and understand whether they've got some of that, because everybody's got a plan. Plans never quite hold true in life because awkward things like competitors happen. If you've got a strong culture, you'll adapt. So it really is important. Try and meet employees of a company you might invest in. Try and speak to their customers, because they'll tell you, customers, I mean, when I was working with Alan Leighton, they knew Walkers had a strong culture. We didn't always agree on everything, the supermarkets and the suppliers, but they knew that we were a serious business. Here's a trick. Here's a tip. Try and complain. See what happens when you complain to a company, and see what results you get from that. If you're given a brush off, it might say something about it. So strategy, really important. Culture, critical, and harder to do because it's somewhat ridiculed because there aren't many hard numbers behind it, but it's really important. The final bit I talked about was performance management, which I think is like, is there a hard edge to this organisation? Do they want to succeed? They might have a good strategy, they might even have a good culture, but are they organised enough to consistently deliver what you need to be getting the above average returns that you want? And the things I look for would be, do you understand how performance is measured? And then, how often are they changing people in the company? I think those things are really important. I'll give you a couple of examples. So, on the how quickly is performance measured, you would be amazed how many companies don't even look at what they've done in terms of how the profit and loss report till weeks or maybe months afterwards because they want the data to be accurate. I mentioned I'm on the board of this joint venture between Nestle and a private equity company in ice cream. It's transformed as a business, and one of the reasons is that the management team are much are way on it. So under Nestle, you'd have a month's results, it would be reviewed 6 weeks afterwards because they wanted to get it exactly right. The management team now look at it, a week after because it's right enough to be able to correct things. They work in I made the point at the recent board meeting. We work in fast-moving consumer goods. The clue is in fast. So speed is important. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Get the right side of the decimal point. But once again, if you talk to people in the business, you'll get a feeling for that. The big retailers will have Monday meetings after trading on Friday. What do we know? What do we understand? That cadence, culture is important. Cadence is important. And I think you can pretty quickly get an impression from people about whether their management team is really on it and driving it versus talking about it and getting distracted by interesting things. And then people churn. The last speaker talked a bit about it as well. Look, I mean, I'm a believer in continuity, and I don't think people decisions should be capricious and arbitrary. But frankly, the world is changing at, I think, an increasingly faster pace. So if your marketing director is the same person as they were 20 years ago, they better be good at digital marketing. They better have a real handle at understanding our generation X, Ys, and Zs are appraising business. And the same goes all the way through. So I think if you're not changing your team to adapt to the skills that are necessary to win, it's a sign. I'm not saying that if you're 60-something you can't be bloody good, but I'm saying on average, if you're not seeing a churn, then it's a question mark for you. Have you got the right skills? Have you got the right people that are prepared to sort of give what they need to do to help you win an ever competitive market? And going back to football, I think Gareth Southgate does that brilliantly. The squad he has today is very different from the Russia World Cup. He has very clear principles. He'll only pick you if you've been playing for the first team of your club. That should have ruled Wayne Rooney out years ago before he was dropped. He'll only pick you if you're a good traveller. So in any squad, your real challenge on culture is not the 11 who are playing. It's the 20 odd or 15 odd who aren't playing. And if they're miserable, that can just suck the energy out of the whole camp. And it's interesting, I'm a Wolves fan, but I'm going to tell you, the Euros, the players voted Conor Cody as the player of the tournament. He never played 1 minute for England, but he was just a bundle of energy. He was a good traveller. So in terms of what the England manager looks for, it's obviously skills, it's track record, but also cultural fit. Are they signing up to how the team's best going to work? So I think that's quite interesting. So if you sort of summarise it really, try and get, if you're looking at investments, try and get under the skin of the numbers. Do you understand the strategy? Has it got a culture that you think you want to, frankly, personalise it? Would you want to work there? Would you want one of your kids to work there? And does it performance manage in a way that looks like they care and they'll handle and deal with awkward issues so they don't go to the line of least resistance? They do things that will force change. It's the soft stuff, and it's not original thought. The soft stuff is the hard stuff. If you can find out what that is, I think you'll beat the average